So yesterday in-person early voting in Florida, the first day of in-person early voting in Florida, it was bad for the Democrats. Now, the Democrats went into the day with having more of the vote composition being registered Democrats. However, they left the first day of early voting actually now being behind. So they made a massive, massive negative change when it comes to that number. If we look at the overall number of people who turned out just yesterday in the state of Florida, almost 50% of them were Republicans. But the interesting thing is we actually look at the turnout rates of both the Democrats and Republicans. The Democrats still have a higher actual turnout rate of their registered voters than the Republicans, but yet the Republicans are in the lead, and this is kind of the problem. And in today's video, we're going to talk about Florida, we're going to talk about the problems that Florida has, and we're going to talk about if Florida can just be considered a solid red state now. Is it a state that the Democrats can even compete in? Now, just a little bit before we get into the video and talk about these changes, I've been working in Florida Democratic politics since 1991. Don't work in it as much anymore, but I still observe and write about it. And my nowcast model with Florida between 2016 and today has been the most accurate model when predicting what happens in Florida of any other model, especially compared to 538. So this is kind of my wheelhouse, even though I talk about other states. Florida is just the one that I know at the absolute most minute parts of the state. So this is where I feel a little bit comfortable and why I'm making this video today, specifically about Florida. Now, are these big, horrible changes that are happening for Democrats or not? Are these more systemic changes, or are these just temporary bumps in the road that maybe this election cycle, even this elections, things might change, or is it something that could change in the future? Well, let's go ahead and start with this election and talk about how the votes are coming in right now and how it's maybe possibly not helping Democrats or possibly helping Democrats. We just really don't know at this point. So one thing that we have noticed right now is that places that you have a lot more Democratic votes are just not performing as well when it comes to turnout rate. So if we look at Broward County compared to Lee County, for example, Broward County being a very Democratic county and Lee County being a large Republican county, we see that the turnout rate in Broward County right now is significantly lower than what we have in Lee, indicating that Democrats are just not showing up in Broward County like they are in Lee County. Taking Lee County, if we look at the amount of absentee requests, vote by mail requests that they have made and the requests that they have returned back compared to, let's say, Orange County, which again is another Democratic county, we see that Lee County has submitted a lot more of their mail-in ballots right now compared to Orange County, which is significantly lagging behind. So we do see this dynamic of Democrats just not voting right now. So why is this changing? Are Democrats basically moving from being vote by mail voters to in-person voters, election day voters, whatever? Well, right now, the one thing we can say is vote by mail is down significantly in the state of Florida. As a matter of fact, the raw numbers that we have right now are equal to what we had in the last midterm election, which was one of the lowest midterm elections that we've had in a while as far as turnout rate is concerned. So a lot of Democrats have not been submitting their ballots. Now, could they submit them at a later date? That's absolutely possible. That could be the case. But one thing we're seeing right now in early in-person voting is that it's strongly Republican. So chances are, as of right now, those numbers are not going to come from the early in-person voting. And as of the time of this recording right now, the Republicans have increased that margin by a little bit more this morning, a few hours into the second day of early in-person voting. So there could be shifts when it comes to the way in which people vote. And one of the biggest problems with a lot of the pundits and pontificators out there when it comes to voting methods is that they look at old trends to determine what current trends are as far as voting methods. Now, you can do this as far as voting behavior because demographics don't change as much, but as far as voting behavior since 2008, we have had a huge shift. Let me go ahead and show you the numbers in both the midterm and presidential elections over the last two cycles for each of them to just show you how much shift there have been in those. So if we look at these numbers and then say, well, we're going to compare right now to what that number was, that is a big flaw. That is a big error and something you shouldn't do. You should maybe look at it as, a measuring stick of where something might be, but don't look at that as gospel and say, this is the way things are. And that is a big flaw right now with a lot of these pundits out there. So We are seeing a shift in vote by mail. Again, maybe the Democrats will get their ballots in. Maybe they're shifting to another method. Probably less likely, but it could be the case. Now, there's another thing that Democrats have talked about, and there is legitimacy with this, and it is the voter purge that we've heard about. How the Republicans just purged a ton of Democratic voters from the voter rolls, where it seems like the Republicans didn't suffer as much. So let me go ahead and show you the 2018 voter registration statistics, and you can see the Democrats very, very slightly ahead. If we go a little bit further in time, right before the purge happened, we see that the Republicans do take the lead, but it is also very, very slight. But if we look at the numbers now, we can see a huge dip in Democratic numbers, showing a lot of them just taken off the roll. So for those people who complain, or I really shouldn't say complain, legitimately say that there has been a purge from the voter rolls for the Democrats, this is absolutely the case, and we can see the evidence here that that is a legitimate argument for Democrats. And on top of that, with the new rules that have come in, and I did a whole video about that, with the restrictions on vote by mail, this really does seem to suppress the Democratic vote in the state of Florida. Now, to just blame this on the Republicans would, I think, be short-sighted to some extent, though I think you could with looking at that voter purge and the change in vote by mail laws. But the Democratic Party is pretty bad when it comes to just how they do elections. So if we look at the gubernatorial races over the last few cycles, with the exception of Andrew Gillum, which he had his own problems, you can see that the Democratic candidates have been very, very dull, not charismatic whatsoever. And this is sad because the Republicans have had very uncharismatic candidates as well, but somehow we end up losing to them. So Bill McBride against Jeb Bush. Bill McBride was exciting as watching wood dry, right? Just not that good. We look at Rick Scott being a person that has no charisma whatsoever, but he's running against Alex Sink, who even has less charisma. The Democrats have just been really bad at candidate recruitment, promoting people within the party and bringing them forward to actually be strong candidates to run statewide. Another problem with the Democratic Party is that you have, and this is where I'm going to get a little personal into it, a lot of grifters in the Democratic Party. You have political consultants who have been losing election cycle after election cycle after election cycle, who have been there for 3 or 4 decades, who are still making money from the Florida Democratic Party and other Florida Democratic consultants. This is a huge, huge problem in the state of Florida. Now, if we look at the local level, we could see that Director Billy Corbin decided to run for the Miami-Dade Democratic Party chair very recently to expose these problems. And this was probably the first time that these problems got exposed to the actual regular person out there, because up to that point, it was pretty much inside baseball. But it is a huge problem in Florida Democratic politics. And as of right now, it doesn't seem like it's going to get fixed. This is another huge problem that the Democrats have to deal with. But then we have to look at just kind of the obvious thing right now, which is that the state of Florida has changed. When I first moved to the state of Florida back in 1987, I would consider it kind of a middle-class utopia where you could buy a nice house in a nice neighborhood for an affordable price. You could have a car, maybe 2 cars. You could afford an annual pass to Disney World. You didn't have to pay an arm and a leg to get there. Everything was affordable and you could live a good middle-class life. Now in the state of Florida, house prices have gone up or they've gone just absolutely down in some places. And you either have the rich people who are in the villages or out on the coast with their Trump flags on their boats, or you have Florida man. So you have the state of Florida changing absolutely drastically. And a lot of this has to do with people like Ron DeSantis creating an environment in the state of Florida that is more suitable for people who are anti-vaxxers, anti-maskers, against woke politics or something like this. He has now created a culture within the state of Florida that are making people with that political ideology flock to the state of Florida. So this could be one of the reasons why we are seeing this huge change in not just voter registration, but demographics as well. But again, this is the Florida Democratic Party's fault. And this goes back to what I mentioned earlier, which is that the Democrats are the reason why people like Ron DeSantis go ahead and win, because they've been going with the same losing political consultants for decades. They've been listening to the same bad and actually elementary advice for decades, because the Florida Democratic Party and the apparatus built around that is just a big machine to make money off of other candidates and off of other consultants, and not there to actually help Democratic Party candidates win. So even though we look at this problem with Ron DeSantis and go, that was bad, a lot of that has to do with the Democrats just totally lost control of an entire state. And it really is pretty much the most Republican state that we're seeing in the South that's maybe outside of the Deep South. Alabama has caught up as well, probably Tennessee. But you have to realize that Florida is the only state in what we would consider the Confederate South that has not had a Democratic governor this century. Okay, so it is pretty Republican. So we do have to look at Florida and ask ourselves, is this even considered a toss-up state anymore? The state legislature is strongly Republican. The governor's race, like I said, the last Democratic governor was technically Buddy McKay back in 1999. So we haven't even had a Democratic governor this century. And when it comes to other statewide races, yes, we do get a win every now and then. Alex Zink won. When it came to CFO, you had Nikki Fried win. When it came to the Agriculture Commissioner, of course, you had Bill Nelson win as far as being a U.S. Senator until he lost to Rick Scott. But when we look at statewide races, it's still a problem. Democrats perform horribly. And we have to come to this point that we have to ask ourselves, as a national Democratic Party, or at least the DNC, DCCC, DSCC, DLCC, they have to ask themselves, do they still want to invest money into Florida? Because as of right now, there seems to be a lot of other places such as Georgia, North Carolina, Texas, Alaska, Arizona, that it makes way more sense to put the money in there instead of the expensive media markets of Florida. To me, you cut the cord right now. Until Florida locally gets their shit together, you absolutely cut the cord. And I think, yeah, we can say it's a pretty red state. All right, well, thank you all very much. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe down below. If you want to be a member, please help and hit the little bell, because I do live streams and it would be great to have you on those. Thank you all very much for joining me. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.